I knew the second the clasp clicked shut. It wasn't a visual thing. My eyes are 82 years old. They have cataracts that cloud the edges of the room like a dirty window pane. I didn't need to see it. I needed to feel it. And what I felt on my left wrist, sitting at the head of my mahogany dining table, was a lie. For 55 years, I have worn a 1968 Rolex Submariner. I bought it with the first bonus check I ever earned as a junior structural engineer in Chicago. That watch has been on my arm while I surveyed foundations in the freezing rain. It was on my arm when I held my wife's hand in the hospice ward, counting the seconds between her final breaths. That watch is not jewelry. It is a part of my anatomy. It has a specific density, a specific gravity. When you wear something for half a century, you know its weight down to the gram. But this thing rattling against my radius bone, it was light, hollow. It felt like a toy you'd pull out of a cereal box. I didn't look down immediately. I kept my posture rigid. I picked up my fork and sliced into the roast beef my daughter-in-law had overcooked, as usual. I chewed slowly. Then I listened. The dining room was quiet, save for the scraping of silverware and the hum of the refrigerator. I tilted my head slightly to the left. Tick, 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 a jagged, staccato rhythm. A mechanical Rolex doesn't tick like a cheap wall clock. It sweeps. It has a heartbeat, a rapid, fluid motion of 28,800 beats per hour that sounds like a frantic, hushed whisper. It hums. This thing on my wrist was screaming. It was a battery-operated quartz, movement stuffed inside a counterfeit steel shell. My heart hammered against my ribs, a cold flush of rage rising up my neck. Someone had come into my bedroom, taken the one object that defined my history, and replaced it with a $20 insult. I looked up. Across the table, my grandson, Julian, was watching me. He was 27 years old, a young man who wore suits that were too tight and drove a leased BMW he couldn't afford. He was holding a glass of Cabernet, but he wasn't drinking. He was staring at my wrist. His eyes were wide, predatory, and wet with panic. He was waiting for the explosion. He was waiting for the senile old man to look down, gasp, and start shouting about thieves. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. I saw the way his leg bounced under the table, shaking the silverware. He thought I was fading. He thought my mind was as clouded as my eyes. He thought I was just Pop, the walking checkbook, the old relic taking up space in the big house. I swallowed the dried beef. I took a sip of water. And then I did the one thing Julian didn't expect. I smiled. I used my right hand to adjust the fake watch, patting it affectionately. Right on time, I said, my voice gravelly but steady. This old thing never misses a beat. Just like me. I saw Julian's shoulders drop 3 inches. He exhaled, a long, shaky breath that sounded like air escaping a punctured tire. He took a massive gulp of wine. He thought he had gotten away with it. He thought he had successfully picked the pocket of a corpse. He had no idea that he hadn't tricked me. He had just signed his own death warrant. I am not just a grandfather. My name is Arthur Penhaligon. For 40 years, I worked as a forensic auditor for heavy infrastructure projects. My job wasn't to look at the building, it was to look at the cracks. My job was to find the fraction of a cent hidden in the concrete pour, the ghost employee on the payroll, the structural weakness that everyone else ignored until the bridge collapsed. I made a fortune by noticing the things other people were too lazy to see. I made a career out of patience. I learned that you never confront a liar the moment you catch them. If you scream thief, they panic and run. They destroy the evidence. They play the victim. No, when you find a crack in the foundation, you don't patch it. You watch it. You measure it. You wait for the stress to build until the whole structure comes down on top of them. Julian wanted to play a game? Fine, I would play, but he didn't know the rules. That night, after the family left, I went into my study. I took the fake watch off and laid it under the harsh light of my desk lamp. It was a decent replica, aesthetically. The dial was black, the bezel turned. But to a trained eye, it was garbage. The font on the dial was a micrometer too thick. The steel was the wrong grade, 316L instead of 904L. It lacked the cold, oily sheen of the real thing. I sat there in the dark, spinning the cheap bezel. I thought about Julian. He was the golden child, the firstborn grandson. He had been given everything. Private schools, tutors, cars, seed money for 3 different startups that all failed within 6 months. He called himself an entrepreneur. I called him a professional leech. He had been sniffing around my finances for months. Pop, you really shouldn't be managing your own portfolio anymore, he'd say, leaning against my doorframe with that arrogant smirk. The market is moving too fast for traditional methods. I can get you into crypto. I can leverage your equity. I always declined. I told him I liked my T-bonds and my boring index funds. I told him I had enough money to last me until I died, and that was all that mattered. He hated that. I could see the resentment boiling behind his eyes. He looked at my house, my car, my accounts, and he didn't see his grandfather's hard work. He saw his inheritance being held hostage by a healthy old man. He felt entitled to it. He felt that by simply existing, he had earned the right to harvest my life's work. And now, he had crossed the line. He hadn't just asked for money. He had stolen it. He had taken the symbol of my dignity and pawned it, likely to pay off a gambling debt or a loan shark he'd met in some nightclub. I picked up the phone. It was 11 p.m., but I knew Elias would be awake. Elias was my jeweler for 30 years, a man who could spot a flawed diamond from across the street. Elias, I said when he answered. It's Arthur. Arthur, is everything all right? It's late. I need you to do something for me, Elias. I'm going to bring you a watch tomorrow. It's a fake. I need you to appraise it. I need you to write me an official documentation stating it is a counterfeit. A fake? Arthur, did you get scammed? Something like that, I said, staring at the empty space on my wrist where the real weight used to be. And Elias? I need you to ask around the district. Find out who sold a 1968 Submariner serial number 2194550 in the last 48 hours. I can make some calls. If it hit the pawn shops or the gray market dealers, I'll find it. But Arthur, if it's stolen, we should call the police. No police, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. Not yet. I'm not interested in getting the watch back, Elias. I'm interested in closing the account. I hung up. The next morning, I began the performance of a lifetime. I put the fake watch back on. I wore it loosely, letting it slide down my hand so everyone could see it. I went to the kitchen and made coffee. When my housekeeper, Maria, came in, I made a show of checking the time. Ah, look at that, Maria, I said, tapping the glass face. 8 o'clock on the dot. Best watch I ever bought. Julian was admiring it yesterday. He's such a good boy, isn't he? Always checking on his grandfather. Maria smiled, but she looked at me with pity. She knew Julian was a shark. She had seen him yelling at me when he thought I was napping in the chair. But she nodded. Yes, Mr. Arthur. He is very attentive. I spent the next week gathering intelligence. I didn't hire a private investigator. I didn't need one. I had access to something better, Julian's stupidity. He had left his iPad logged in on my Wi-Fi network the last time he visited. He thought I didn't know how to use the cloud. He was wrong. I sat in my study, scrolling through the synced messages on the family tablet. I found a thread immediately. It wasn't with a girlfriend. It was with a contact saved as Vegas Mike. Vegas Mike, your underwater kid. 40K, due Tuesday. Julian, I'm handling it. I got an asset. Vintage luxury. Liquidating it tomorrow. Vegas Mike, don't stiff me, Jules. You know how this works. Julian done. Sold it for 18K cash. Fast sale. I'll wire you the rest next week. The old man doesn't suspect a thing. He's checking out mental decline. I'm in the clear. I read that last line 3 times. He's checking out. $18,000. He sold a watch worth $60,000 for 18 just to get quick cash to pay a bookie. He didn't just steal from me. He insulted the value of the theft. He wasted it. I sat back in my leather chair. The anger was gone now, replaced by a cold, mathematical resolve. If I confronted him now, what would happen? I'd show him the texts. He'd cry. He'd blame the gambling addiction. My son, his father, would beg me to go easy on him. He's just a boy, Dad. He made a mistake. We'll get him into rehab, and I would pay for the rehab. And Julian would inherit the estate in 5 or 10 years. And he would burn through it all in a decade, leaving nothing for his sister, nothing for the charities I supported. No, a reprimand wasn't enough. I needed an excision. I needed to prove to everyone, my son, my daughter-in-law, the lawyers, that Julian wasn't just troubled. He was cancerous. And to do that, I had to let the tumor grow. I decided then and there. I would wear this cheap, ticking insult on my wrist for as long as it took. I would become exactly what Julian thought I was, a senile, helpless old fool. I would let him think he had won. I would let him get comfortable. I would let him spend money he didn't have, banking on an inheritance that was already gone. I picked up my calendar. I flipped forward 6 months. Thanksgiving, I whispered to the empty room. That was the target. I would give him 6 months of rope, enough to hang himself twice over. The hardest part of a forensic audit isn't finding the fraud. It's staying silent once you've found it. When you discover a localized rot in a structural beam, your instinct is to scream, to clear the building, to call in the crews. But if you do that too early, you miss the extent of the damage. You miss the termites eating the joists on the floor above. You miss the water damage seeping into the concrete below. You have to let the building creak a little longer. You have to let the weight settle. I decided to let Julian feel the weight of his own greed. For the next 6 months, I became an actor. Arthur Penhaligon, a man who once memorized the stress tolerances of suspension cables, started forgetting things. Julian, I'd say, squinting at the fake watch on my wrist while he sat in my living room, scrolling on his phone. Is it Tuesday? My watch says the 3rd, but the calendar says, well, I can't read the calendar anymore. I watched him out of the corner of my eye. He didn't even look up. It's Thursday, pop pop, he said, his voice dripping with that sickening, patronizing sweetness. You really need to get your eyes checked again. Maybe it's time we looked into assisted living, just for the support. No. I wave him off, polishing the cheap crystal of the counterfeit Rolex with my thumb. I'm fine here, as long as I have my things, my memories. I tapped the watch case hard enough to make the hollow metal ring. This watch, your grandmother loved this watch. I'm going to make sure you get it, Julian. Soon. I saw the greed flash across his face like a lightning strike. He licked his lips. He was doing the math. He knew he had already sold the real one for $18,000. If I gave him the fake one in a will, he wouldn't get a dime. But if he could get control of the rest of the estate, that was the real prize. The watch was just the appetizer. He wanted the main course. I needed to make him believe the buffet was open. 2 weeks later, I called my lawyer, Henderson. Henderson is a man who wears 3-piece suits in July and smiles like a shark sensing blood in the water. We met at a diner 3 towns over, away from prying eyes. I laid the appraisal for the fake watch on the table between us, right next to his coffee. Henderson read it. He didn't blink. He just looked at me over his spectacles. Julian, he asked. Julian, I confirmed. Do you want to press charges? We have a serial number. We have the jeweler's statement. It's grand larceny, Arthur. He'd do 3 to 5 years, easy. No, I said, cutting into my eggs. Prison is too good for him. In prison, he gets 3 meals a day. He gets structure. He gets to play the victim. I want something more permanent. I want to bankrupt him. I want to strip him of the one thing he values more than family, his status. I leaned in. I want to restructure the trust, but I want to do it in a way that makes him think he's won. I want to announce a living distribution. I want him to believe I'm liquidating the assets and handing them out before I die. Henderson's eyes crinkled at the corners. He pulled a notepad from his jacket pocket. Go on. We schedule a meeting for November 15th. We tell the family I'm updating the estate plan. We drop hints, heavy ones, that I'm simplifying my life. Cash distributions, real estate transfers. We make Julian believe he is walking out of that room with a deed to the lake house and a check for $2 million. And in reality, Henderson asked, his pen hovering. In reality, I said, we draft a new codicil, one that ties his inheritance specifically to the assets he has stewarded for me. We make the specific bequest of the watch the centerpiece, and we verify everything else is locked down tight in a charitable remainder trust. He gets nothing, absolutely nothing, but he won't know that until he's already spent the money he thinks he's getting. Henderson smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. You're a cruel man, Arthur. I'm a distinct man, I corrected. I value precision. The trap was set. Now came the bait. I started asking Julian for help with my accounts. I gave him access to a small checking account I use for household repairs, about $50,000. I told him, Julian, I'm getting confused by these online statements. Can you manage this for me? Just keep the lights on and the roof fixed. It was a test, a control group. Within 3 weeks, the balance dropped by $12,000. The memo lines on the withdrawals were vague. Consulting fee, admin expenses, logistics. I traced them. They went straight to a Shell LLC registered to Julian's friend, the one he called Crypto Kyle. From there, the money went to a leasing agency for luxury cars and a high-end nightclub in the city. He wasn't investing my money. He was eating it. He was drinking it. He was snorting it. But I didn't stop him. I let him drain it down to $4,000. When he came to me, sweating, saying there were unexpected taxes on the account, I just nodded vaguely. Oh, the government, I sighed, looking out the window. Always taking their share. You're a good boy for handling it, Julian. I don't know what I'd do without you. That was the green light. He thought I was blind. He thought I was a bottomless pit of money with a leaking brain. October arrived. The leaves turned brown and fell, rotting on the lawn. The air turned crisp. I dropped the bomb at Sunday dinner. I've made a decision, I announced, tapping my spoon against my glass. The table went silent. My son, Robert, Julian's father, looked up from his mashed potatoes. Julian stopped mid-text. I'm tired of all this administration, I said, gesturing vaguely at the house. I'm meeting with Henderson next month, November 15th. I'm going to do a living distribution. I want to see you all enjoy the fruits of my labor while I'm still here to watch. I looked directly at Julian. I saw his pupils dilate. It was a physiological reaction to the promise of millions. I'm going to sign over the deeds, I lied, and the bulk of the investment accounts. I just want to keep enough for a small apartment. The rest, it's yours. The room erupted in feigned protests. Oh, Dad, you don't have to do that. But Julian said nothing. He just sat there, vibrating. The next day, the wait began to pay off. I have alerts set up on my credit report. I have alerts set up on the property titles. 2 days after my announcement, I got a notification. Julian had applied for a hard money bridge loan. These are loans for desperate people or high-risk developers. The interest rates are predatory, 15, sometimes 20%. They are short-term loans designed to bridge the gap between buying a property and selling it. Julian was borrowing against his guaranteed inheritance. He took out a loan for $200,000, then another for $300,000. I did some digging. He wasn't paying off debts anymore. He was leveraging up. He put a non-refundable deposit on a penthouse condo in the energetic part of the city. He ordered a custom G-Wagon. He started booking a celebration tour in Ibiza for December. He was spending money that didn't exist, banking on a check that would never be written. He came to visit me more often in those final weeks. He brought me coffee. He asked about my health. He was checking the expiration date on the milk, making sure I lasted just long enough to sign the papers. One afternoon, a week before the meeting, he sat across from me in the study. I was wearing the fake Rolex. I had scratched the clasp against the desk earlier that day, deliberately scarring the cheap metal. That watch really is something, pop, he said, his eyes fixated on it. You know, I've always admired it. It's timeless. It is, I agreed. It's worth a lot, Julian. More than you know. It's the weight of it. Real quality has weight. Yeah, he chuckled, a nervous, high-pitched sound. Can I hold it? Just for a second. I paused. This was bold. He wanted to hold the fake he had swapped, just to reassure himself that I was still too stupid to notice. He wanted to gloat. I unclasped it. I handed it to him. He held it in his hand. He weighed it. He knew it was the fake. He knew it was light. He smiled at me. A smile of pure, unadulterated contempt. Wow, he said softly. It's perfect. Keep it safe for me, I said, taking it back and snapping it onto my wrist. Until the meeting. I will, he promised. I'll take great care of everything. He left the house whistling. I watched him get into his car. I watched him drive away. I picked up the phone and dialed Henderson. Is the paperwork ready? I asked. It is, Henderson replied. The trap is primed. The notary will be there at 10 a.m. Good, I said. He just spent another $50,000 on a deposit for a boat. He's all in, Henderson. He's betting his life. And you're sure about this, Arthur? There's no going back. Once we do this, the family breaks. I looked down at the ticking abomination on my wrist. I thought about the $18,000 he sold my history for. I thought about the smirk. The family broke 6 months ago, I said. I'm just sweeping up the glass. I hung up. The waiting was over. It was time for the execution. The conference room at Henderson and Associates smelled of lemon polish and old leather. It was a smell designed to make you feel safe, to make you feel like the law was a warm blanket. But to Julian, it must have smelled like blood. He sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, tapping his foot. The vibration traveled through the wood, a nervous tremor I could feel in my own elbows. He was wearing a new suit, Italian wool, peak lapels, probably $2,000. He had a Mont Blanc pen resting next to a notepad he hadn't written a single word on. My son, Robert, sat next to him, looking bored. Robert had always been passive, a man who let life happen to him rather than making it happen. He assumed this meeting was a formality. He assumed he would walk out with a check, pat me on the head, and go back to his golf game. I sat at the head of the table. Henderson sat to my right. Shall we begin? Henderson asked, his voice dry as parchment. Please, Julian said, leaning forward. Pop gets tired in the afternoons. Let's keep it moving. I didn't look at him. I looked at the watch on my wrist. The fake one. The one Julian had swapped out 6 months ago. The one he had just admired in my study, checking to see if I was still the fool he took me for. Henderson opened the file. Arthur has decided to restructure his estate into a living trust. The goal is to distribute assets now to avoid probate later. Julian nodded vigorously. Smart. Very smart. However, Henderson continued, Arthur has made specific provisions regarding the liquidation of personal property. Henderson slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It wasn't a check. It was a photocopy of a pawn shop receipt. Julian frowned. He didn't recognize it instantly. Why would he? He probably crumpled the original up and threw it in a bin the second he got his cash. What is this? Robert asked, squinting at the paper. I cleared my throat. The room went dead silent. That, I said, my voice steady and cold, is the receipt for a 1968 Rolex Submariner. Serial number 2194550. Julian froze. His hand, halfway to his water glass, stopped in midair. I don't understand, Robert said. Dad, isn't that your watch? No, I said. My watch is currently in a display case at Golden Time on 47th Street. Or it was, until it was melted down or resold. This receipt shows it was sold on June 14th, 2023, for $18,000. I slowly unclasped the watch from my wrist. The cheap metal rattled. And this, I said, holding up the fake, is the replacement. A counterfeit, worth perhaps $50 on a good day. I looked at Julian. His face had drained of all color. He looked like a wax figure melting under a heat lamp. Julian, I said softly, do you recognize this? Pop, He stammered. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a choke. I don't know what you're talking about. You're confused. You lose things. You probably sold it yourself and forgot. I expected you to say that, I said. I nodded to Henderson. Henderson pressed a button on his laptop. A monitor on the wall flickered to life. It was grainy footage, but clear enough. It showed a young man in a hoodie leaning over a glass counter. He was handing over a watch. He was showing his ID. He was signing a form. The young man was Julian. The pawn shop owner is a cautious man, Henderson said. He keeps excellent records, especially when the police ask for them. Police. Robert stood up. Dad, what the hell is going on? You called the police on your own grandson. Sit down, Robert, I snapped. The command was sharp enough to make him drop back into his chair. I turned my eyes back to Julian. He was shaking now, visibly shaking. I didn't call the police, I said. Not yet. I wanted to see how far you would go. I wanted to see if there was any bottom to your greed. I placed the fake watch on the table. With a flick of my wrist, I slid it across the mahogany. SCHHHHK. The metal bracelet hissed against the varnish. It slid 10 feet, spinning slowly, until it bumped against Julian's water glass. Clink. There is your inheritance, I said. Julian stared at the watch. What? He whispered. The watch, I said. It's yours. I leave it to you in my will, along with the debt attached to it. Debt? Julian looked up, his eyes wild. What debt? The bridge loans, I said calmly. The $200,000 from the hard money lender. The $300,000 for the condo deposit. The lease on the G-Wagon. You spent the last 6 months borrowing against a fortune you thought you were getting today. You thought I was senile. You thought I was a mark. I leaned forward. I wasn't losing my mind, Julian. I was biding my time. You knew. He whispered. The whole time. Every second, I said. Every time you asked me to sign a check. Every time you told me to check the date. I was watching you dig your own grave. But the money, Julian gasped. I spent it. I put down non-refundable deposits. If I don't pay them by Friday, then you will be in breach of contract, Henderson interjected smoothly. And given the nature of the lenders you used, I imagine they will be very unhappy. Dad, Robert shouted. You can't do this. He's a kid. He's ruined. You have millions. Just pay it off and we'll handle him. I looked at my son. I am handling him, Robert. This is the only way he learns. You raised a thief. I am not going to finance him. I don't have the money. Julian screamed. He stood up, knocking his chair over. I don't have it. They'll kill me. You have to help me. I did help you, I said. I gave you 6 months to come clean. I gave you 6 months to return the money. Instead, you bought a boat. I pulled a second document from a folder. The proceeds from the sale of the real watch, the $62,000 it was actually worth, have been donated, I said, to the city cat shelter. In your name, Julian. You're a philanthropist now. A cat shelter? Julian stared at me, his mouth open. You gave my money to cats. It wasn't your money, I said. It was mine, and the cats have more integrity. Henderson closed the file with a heavy thud. The rest of the estate, Henderson announced, has been placed into an irrevocable charitable trust. Arthur retains a life estate in the house and a stipend for his care. Upon his death, the entire principal liquidates to the Engineering Scholarship Fund at City College. There is no residual for family members. The silence that followed was absolute. Julian looked at the fake watch in front of him. He looked at me. He looked at the door. Then he broke. He didn't attack me. He didn't attack Henderson. He just crumpled. He put his head in his hands and started to sob. It wasn't a cry of remorse. It was the cry of a man who realizes the floor has vanished. Get out, I said. Dad, Robert started. Get out, I repeated. Both of you. I have a lunch reservation. Robert grabbed Julian by the arm and dragged him up. Julian was dead weight. He was mumbling about interest rates and extensions. They shuffled out of the room, a defeated, pathetic procession. The door clicked shut. I sat there for a moment in the silence. The air conditioner hummed. Well, Henderson said, taking a sip of his water. That was thorough. It was necessary, I said. I looked at my bare wrist. It felt light. Strange. Do you want me to help you find another submariner? Henderson asked. We could track one down. No, I said. I don't need a watch anymore. I stood up and walked to the window. Below, on the street, I saw Julian and Robert exiting the building. Julian was on his phone, frantically pacing the sidewalk. He was gesturing wildly. The creditors were calling. The clock was ticking. And for the first time in 6 months, I didn't hear a thing. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. Revenge is a structural repair. It's removing the rot so the rest of the house doesn't fall down. Julian declared bankruptcy 3 months later. The lenders took the condo, the car, and the boat. He's currently working as a shift manager at a logistics center in Jersey. Robert doesn't speak to me, but he still cashes the birthday checks I send him. As for me, I bought a $30 Timex at the drugstore. It keeps perfect time. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that Rolex. I think about the weight of it. But then I look at the tax receipt from the cat shelter framed on my wall. A legacy isn't what you leave for people. It's what you leave in them. I left Julian with a lesson. It was the most expensive education he ever got. Don't mistake silence for weakness. And never, ever try to hustle a man who builds bridges for a living. We know exactly how much weight a structure can take before it snaps. And we know exactly when to pull the pin.